Hey everyone, hope you're doing great. Welcome back to my channel. In today's video, we'll dive into what if Deku went rogue and became a Red Hood type antihero. Smash that subscribe button, and be sure to peek at the description below. Let's begin. The rain over Musafu was a miserable, clinging thing. It wasn't the cleansing downpour of a summer storm. It was a cold, persistent drizzle that seeped into everything, turning the already grim city into a waterlogged smear of neon and shadow. For Izuku Midoriya, it was just background noise, another layer of discomfort in a world that had forgotten what comfort felt like. It had been 38 days since the end of the Paranormal Liberation War. 38 days of relentless patrols, of hunting escaped convicts, of trying to patch a society that was hemorrhaging hope from 1,000 different wounds. Sleep was a luxury. A stolen hour here and there in a sterile cot at the newly fortified UA High. Food was a nutrient bar crammed down his throat between one crisis and the next. His friends' faces, when he saw them, were etched with the same bone-deep exhaustion he felt in his own marrow. He stood perched on the edge of a gargoyle atop a pre-Quark-era skyscraper, the green lightning of One for All flickering around him like a nervous tick. It was no longer the brilliant, hopeful emerald of his debut. It was a darker, more volatile Vidian, a storm cloud green that mirrored the tempest in his soul. Below, the city churned. The fear was palpable, a foul taste in the air like spoiled milk. People scurried from awning to awning, heads down, avoiding eye contact. Heroes were few and far between, stretched impossibly thin. The symbol of peace was a ghost, and the boy trying to fill his shoes was running on fumes and the frantic, desperate whispers of the vestiges in his head. Stay focused, Ninth. Daigoro Banjo's voice echoed in his mind, sharp and commanding. Fatigue makes you sloppy. He's right. Haikid Shinomori added, his tone a dry whisper. Danger sense is flaring at the edges. Not a direct threat. Just ambient malice. The whole city is a live wire. I know, Izuku thought, his jaw tight. He scanned the alleyways below, his eyes, enhanced by a low-level application of One for All, piercing the gloom. He was chasing a ghost, a low-level villain with a strength-enhancing quirk who had been using the chaos to run a protection racket. It was mundane, pathetic work compared to fighting Shigaraki, but this was the reality now. The Leviathans had torn the world open, and now the bottom feeders were swarming in to feast on the scraps. His calm crackled to life. Deku report. Any sign of Hammerhead? It was Endeavor's gruff voice, strained and impatient. Negative, sir, Izuku replied, his own voice a hoarse rasp. Still sweeping the Kamino sector. The rain is making it difficult to track. Find him. We don't have the manpower to let these vermin run free. Endeavor out. The line went dead. Izuku sighed, the breath misting in the cold air. Vermin. That's what they were. But each one was a threat. Each one could hurt someone. A family. A child. His mantra, the one that kept him moving when his body screamed for rest, echoed in his thoughts. I have to save everyone. I have to be the one they can count on. I have to smile, to reassure them. He tried to force a smile, a phantom echo of All Might's signature grin. The muscles in his face felt stiff and unfamiliar. It felt like a lie, a flicker of movement in a side street below. His danger sense didn't just flare, it screamed. A high-pitched whine that lanced through his skull. Not Hammerhead. Something else. Something worse. He dropped from the gargoyle, using float to slow his descent into a silent, controlled fall. He landed in the mouth of the alley without a sound, his tattered green cloak settling around him. The scene was grim. 3 men, their faces contorted in pain, were writhing on the wet pavement. Their limbs were twisted at unnatural angles. Standing over them was a figure silhouetted against the streetlights. Tall, wiry, with a manic energy that made the air feel electric. Izuku recognized him from the files. Kento Hakamichi. Villain name, Barricade. Quirk, Shrapnel Shot. He could generate and fire razor-sharp shards of metal from his skin. A B-lister, recently escaped from a medium security facility during the Tartarus breakout. According to the file, Deku had been the one to apprehend him 2 years ago during a botched bank robbery. Hakamichi turned, a wide, broken-toothed grin splitting his face. His eyes were wild, unhinged. Well, well, well. Look what the cat dragged in. Yue's little golden boy. The next symbol of peace. He spat the title like a curse. Hakamichi, Izuku said, his voice level despite the pounding in his chest. It's over. Surrender now. Surrender? The villain let out a high, cackling laugh that grated on Izuku's nerves. I don't think so. I've been waiting for this. You ruined me, kid. Took everything from me. Threw me in a cage. While I was rotting, you were playing hero on TV. Doesn't seem fair, does it? Another one, Izuku thought, a wave of weariness washing over him. Another villain blaming a hero for their own choices. You robbed a bank. You hurt people. You're responsible for your own actions. Actions have consequences, right? Hakamichi's grin widened, becoming something predatory and deeply unsettling. That's what you heroes are always yapping about. Well, tonight you're going to learn all about consequences. He flexed his hands, and a cascade of metallic slivers sprouted from his knuckles. But not here. This is just the opening act. Before Izuku could react, Hakamichi stomped his foot. The ground beneath him erupted as a pre-planned explosive device detonated, not with lethal force, but with a blinding flash and a deafening bang. It was a flashbang military grade. Izuku's senses, already heightened by One for All, were overwhelmed. White light seared his vision, and a concussive roar deafened him. He stumbled back, shaking his head to clear it. By the time his vision returned, a mess of swimming spots and blurry shapes, Hakamichi was gone. Coward! Izuku growled, clenching his fists. Black whip tendrils snaked out from his arms, tasting the air for any trace of the villain. Nothing. He had vanished into the city's chaotic labyrinth. His calm buzzed again. This time, it wasn't a hero. It was the Central Dispatch. The operator's voice was young, panicked. All heroes in the Musafu residential sector. We have a villain attack in progress. Reports of explosions, quirk usage, the address is... Izuku was already turning away, focusing on the hunt for Hammerhead. It was another fire to put out. There were always more fires. The Midoriya residence. Apartment 4B. The world stopped. The rain. The neon lights. The distant sirens. The whispers of the vestiges. Everything vanished, replaced by a single, silent, ice-cold spike of dread that pierced him through the heart. No, it was a mistake. A coincidence. There were other Midoriyas in the city. There had to be. Ninth! The second's voice was a thunderclap in his head. Go! Now! He didn't need to be told. The world snapped back into focus, but it was a different world now. A world where only one thing mattered. He ignored the calm, ignored protocol, ignored everything. He channeled One for All into his legs, the green lightning now a frantic, blinding corona. He shot into the air with a sonic boom that shattered the windows of the surrounding buildings. The city became a blur. He pushed Float and F.A. Jean to their absolute limits, combining them with air force to propel himself across the rooftops at impossible speeds. Every gust of wind was a mocking whisper. Every second that passed was an eternity of failure. Please be okay. Mom, please be okay. I'm coming. I'm almost there. Please, please, please. His mind was a maelstrom of panic and prayer. He saw her face in his mind's eye, her gentle smile, the worry lines she always had when he went out on patrol, the fierce pride when she watched him on the news, the woman who had believed in him when no one else did. The one who had stitched his first dozen costumes with tears in her eyes, terrified but supportive. He saw the building from a dozen blocks away. Smoke was curling from a fourth-floor window. His window. The air tore around him as he broke the sound barrier again. He didn't bother with the stairs or the door. He aimed his body like a missile and smashed through the wall of the neighboring apartment, the plaster and wiring exploding around him. He scrambled through the hole, his heart hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. The smell hit him first. Ozone, burnt plastic, and the sickeningly coppery scent of blood. His apartment was destroyed. The place where he had grown up, the sanctuary filled with all-might memorabilia and a lifetime of memories, was a wreck. The sofa was overturned and smoldering. The walls were peppered with metallic shards. His collection of hero figurines was shattered on the floor, a tiny, broken All Might lying decapitated near his feet, and in the center of the devastation, Kenta Hakamichi stood over a figure on the floor. It was his mother. Inko Midoriya was lying in a pool of her own blood, her body pierced by dozens of cruel, glinting metal spikes. Her breath was coming in shallow, ragged gasps. Hakamichi turned, his maniacal grin returning. See? Consequences. You took my life, so I took something of yours. An eye for an eye. A mother for a, well, you get it. He gestured to Inko with a theatrical flair. She was surprisingly tough. Kept telling me her son was a hero. That he would save her. Time seemed to bend and warp around Izuku. The frantic panic inside him didn't explode into rage. It collapsed. It imploded, leaving behind a terrifying, silent, black hole vacuum. The whispers of the vestiges went quiet. The adrenaline vanished. All that remained was a cold, clear, crystalline certainty. He looked at Hakamichi. Not as a hero looking at a villain, but as a predator looking at prey. You talk too much, Izuku said. His voice was not his own. It was a flat, dead thing, devoid of any emotion. Hakamichi's grin faltered. He saw the change in the boy's eyes. The familiar, hopeful green was gone, replaced by a cold, bottomless abyss. He fired a volley of shrapnel, a silver cloud of death that should have shredded any target. Izuku didn't dodge. He moved. He used 45% of One for All, a burst of impossible speed. To Hakamichi, it looked like he teleported. One moment, Deku was across the room. The next, he was right in front of him, his hand clamped around the villain's wrist. Crack! The sound of bones snapping was sickeningly loud in the ruined apartment. Hakamichi screamed, a shrill, piercing sound of agony. Izuku's grip tightened, and Black Whip, no longer a tool of capture but of constriction, erupted from his arm. The dark tendrils wrapped around Hakamichi's other arm, squeezing until the bone audibly splintered. Another scream, this one choked with terror. You wanted my attention, Izuku said, his voice still terrifyingly calm as he pulled the now armless villain close. You have it. He delivered a precise, calculated kick to Hakamichi's left kneecap. It shattered. The villain collapsed, howling. Izuku followed him down, planting a foot on his chest. Please stop! Hakamichi sobbed, tears and snot mixing with the blood on his face. Mercy! Izuku looked down at him, his face an unreadable mask of cold fury. Did you show her mercy? He didn't use a smash. That was for heroes. Smashes were for knocking villains out, for ending fights quickly. This wasn't a fight. This was an execution. He drew his leg back and delivered a series of rapid, brutal kicks. One to the right knee, shattering it. One to the ribs, cracking them. One to the jaw, dislocating it with a wet crunch. He stopped only when Hakamichi was a broken, whimpering heap on the floor, conscious but utterly incapacitated. He wouldn't be running, fighting, or speaking for a very, very long time. Izuku felt nothing, no satisfaction, no relief. Just empty. He turned away from the wreckage of the villain and rushed to his mother's side. Mom! He whispered, his voice finally cracking. He knelt beside her, his hands hovering over her wounds, helpless. The green lightning of One for All flickered over his fingers, a power that could level cities but couldn't knit a single severed artery. Her eyes fluttered open. They were hazy with pain, but they found his. A weak, trembling smile touched her lips. Izuku! She breathed, a bubble of blood forming at the corner of her mouth. You came! I'm here, Mom! I'm here! He choked out, tears finally beginning to stream down his face, mixing with the rain and soot on his cheeks. Just hold on. Help is on the way. You're going to be okay. It was a lie. He knew it was a lie. He could see it in the pallor of her skin, feel it in the chilling cold of her hand as he took it in his own. The light was fading from her eyes. She squeezed his hand with what little strength she had left. You look so tired, my baby. Her gaze flickered to the All Might poster still miraculously intact on a piece of standing wall. You always wanted to be a hero. I am a hero, Mom. I'm here to save you. He sobbed, his carefully constructed control shattering into a million pieces. Her smile was so sad, so gentle. You are my hero! Izuku, her grip slackened. Her chest gave one last, shallow shudder. And then, she was still. The silence that followed was absolute. It was heavier than any mountain, colder than any winter. Izuku knelt there, holding his mother's hand in the ruins of his childhood, the rain drumming a funeral dirge on the broken roof. He didn't scream. He didn't rage. A part of him had just been surgically removed without anesthetic, and the void it left behind was consuming everything. He stayed there until the flashing red and blue lights painted the walls, until the paramedics and other heroes arrived. They had to gently pry his mother's hand from his. He didn't resist. He just stared at his own hands, the ones that held the most powerful quirk in history. The hands that were supposed to save everyone. The hands that had failed the only person who mattered. The hospital wing at Yui was a sterile white purgatory. Izuku sat on the edge of a bed, still in his torn and blood-spattered costume. A medic had cleaned the superficial cuts on his face, but he hadn't let them touch anything else. He felt disconnected, like he was watching a movie of his own life. The door slid open. All Might entered, in his skeletal form, looking older and more fragile than ever. His face was a canvas of grief and profound sorrow. Behind him were Uraraka, Ida, Todoroki, and Bakugo. Their faces were a mixture of horror, pity, and fear. Young Midoriya. All Might began, his voice thick with unshed tears. Izuku. I am so sorry. Izuku didn't look at him. He continued to stare at his hands, turning them over and over. He saw the scars, the calluses, the faint green glow still pulsing under the skin. He saw the phantom stain of his mother's blood. Uraraka stepped forward, her hands clasped in front of her, her own eyes red-rimmed and puffy. Deku, if you need anything at all, we're here. Ida adjusted his glasses, though it did nothing to hide the tears welling. Midoriya, this is a tragedy of unimaginable proportions. But you are not alone. We, your friends, stand with you. Todoroki remained silent by the door, his mismatched eyes filled with a deep, knowing pain. He understood loss. He understood the rage that came with it. Bakugo stood in the back, his usual explosive anger completely absent. His hands were stuffed in his pockets, his shoulders slumped. He looked at the silent figure on the bed, at the empty shell that used to be his rival, and for the first time in his life, he had absolutely nothing to say. He just looked, lost. Izuku finally spoke, his voice low and monotone. The villain. Hakamichi. What's his status? All Might flinched. He was taken to the villain medical ward at Tartarus. His injuries are extensive. The doctors say he'll live. But he'll never walk again. Izuku's head slowly lifted. He looked at his mentor, his eyes as empty as a starless sky. He'll live? Yes. All Might said, a note of confusion in his voice. The law dictates. The law. Izuku repeated the words as if they were a foreign language. He let out a single, short, bitter laugh that was more terrifying than any scream. The law failed to keep him in a cell. The law failed to protect her. The law will let him live, and maybe, someday, the law will let him out again. Son, that's not— Don't call me that. Izuku snapped, his voice suddenly sharp as glass. The green energy around him flared for a moment, making the lights flicker. Everyone in the room flinched. He lowered his head again, returning his gaze to his hands. Please, he said, the word barely a whisper. Leave me alone. Hesitantly, one by one, they filed out. All Might was the last to leave. He stood in the doorway, his heart breaking. He had seen grief, had seen heroes break, but this was different. This was a soul being unmade. Izuku, he said softly. It's not your fault. Izuku didn't reply. He just kept staring at his hands. The door slid shut, leaving him in silence. Night fell. The hospital was quiet. The doctors had given him a sedative, but his mind refused to succumb. It was too sharp, too clear. He lay in the dark, replaying the moment of her death over and over. Her last words. You are my hero. A hero. What a joke. He sat up. The hollow feeling inside him had finally solidified into something else. It was cold, hard, and heavy. It was resolve. Quietly, he slid out of the bed. His costume was folded on a chair. He ignored it. He found his spare change of clothes, a plain black hoodie, dark cargo pants, and combat boots. He dressed in silence, his movements fluid and precise. He took nothing sentimental. No pictures, no keepsakes. They were relics of a life that had ended hours ago. He walked to the desk by the window. He found a pen and a single sheet of UA letterhead. His hand was perfectly steady as he wrote. The words came easily, as if they had been waiting, fully formed, in the new, cold part of his mind. He folded the note neatly and placed it in the center of the desk, weighing it down with a small, unbroken all-might keychain he'd had since he was a child. It was the only thing he would leave behind. He slid the window open. The cold, wet air felt good on his skin. He looked out at the lights of the city he had sworn to protect. A city that had taken everything from him. With one last look at the empty room, Izuku Midoriya stepped out onto the ledge. He gathered one for all, the Vidian energy coiling around him like a shroud. Then, without a sound, he vanished into the night. Hours later, a worried Toshinori Yagi entered the room, unable to stay away. He saw the empty bed, the open window, and the single folded note on the desk. His blood ran cold. With a trembling hand, he picked it up and read the neat, steady handwriting of the boy he had considered a son. You were wrong. You can't save everyone, but you can make sure they never hurt anyone again. 6 months is a lifetime. In the shattered landscape of post-war Japan, 6 months was an eon. It was long enough for the initial, shrieking chaos to curdle into a low, persistent thrum of anxiety. Long enough for the tent cities and the parks to become semi-permanent fixtures, grim monuments to a broken system. Long enough for the most notorious villains to be hunted down or driven deep into hiding, leaving a power vacuum that festered with new kinds of rot. And it was long enough for a new ghost to begin haunting the rain-slicked streets of Musafu. They didn't know his name, not really. The media, in their frantic attempts to label the unlabelable, had dubbed him Vidian, a name snatched from the terrified ramblings of the first few criminals he'd left broken in alleyways. They'd spoken of a blinding, storm-green light, a furious energy that seemed to burn with a cold fire. But in the city's underbelly, in the grimy dive bars and clandestine meeting spots where the city's predators gathered, he was known by other names. The Ghost of Musafu. The Green Reaper. The Judge. He was a story told in hushed, fearful whispers, a modern-day boogeyman whose legend was written in shattered bone and leaked data. The Stray Dog was one such bar, tucked away in a district the heroes rarely patrolled anymore. It smelled of stale beer, unwashed bodies, and desperation. The lights were low, the music was a dirge-like throb, and every patron looked like they were either running from something or hunting for something. It was here that Kenji, a kid barely 19 with a useless quirk that let him see in the dark, sat nursing a lukewarm soda, his hands trembling. Across the scarred wooden table sat Tetsu, a mountain of a man whose quirk, slag fists, allowed him to coat his hands in hardened, molten metal. He was flexing his signature weapons, a low growl rumbling in his chest. I'm telling you, it's all crap, he grumbled, his voice like gravel in a blender. Just some new hero trying to make a name for himself by playing rough. A little bit of theater to scare the competition. The third man at the table, Kageyama, took a long, slow drag from his cigarette, the tip glowing like a malevolent eye in the gloom. Kageyama was a broker, a man who had slid into the void left by Jiren's disappearance. He wasn't as connected, not as smooth, but he was ambitious. He dealt in information, goods, and people, and he saw the current chaos not as a disaster, but as an opportunity. Theater doesn't leave a man like Gigantia with both his arms and legs bent into the shape of a pretzel, Kageyama said, his voice a dry rasp. He exhaled a plume of smoke. Theater doesn't hack into the Yakuza's offshore accounts and drain them dry in under 5 minutes. Theater doesn't leave the heads of the slasher syndicate hog-tied and dangling from the Musafu skyspire with a complete ledger of their crimes stapled to their chests for the morning news copters to find. This is not theater. This is a change in the ecosystem. Kenji flinched, remembering the news reports. He'd seen the footage. The men dangling high above the city, their faces masks of pure terror. They say he doesn't kill, Kenji whispered, his voice barely audible over the bar's noise. It was a fact he clung to, a tiny sliver of hope in the terrifying stories. Tetsu snorted. He might as well. I heard what he did to the Smilers. Broke every single one of their teeth, one by one. Left them for the cops, drooling and crying. What kind of hero does that? The kind we don't want to meet, Kageyama said, his eyes narrowing as he fixed his gaze on his two underlings. The stories all have a common thread. He targets the worst of us, the slavers, the pushers selling to kids, the ones who enjoy cruelty for its own sake. He seems to know things. He hits operations that no one, not even the heroes, should have intel on. So we lay low? Kenji asked, his voice full of a hope he knew was foolish. Kageyama crushed his cigarette in the overflowing ashtray. No. We get smarter. We have a big score tonight. Big enough to set us up for months. Big enough to get us out of this haunted city if we want. Tetsu's eyes lit up with greed. What is it? A shipment, Kageyama said, leaning in. High-value goods coming in from overseas. The port is a mess, so they're using a private distribution point. An old warehouse in the industrial sector. Light security. We go in, we take the crate, and we're gone before anyone knows what happened. What kind of goods? Kenji asked, his stomach churning. Kageyama's definition of goods was notoriously flexible. Kageyama gave him a cold, dismissive look. The kind you don't ask questions about. All you need to know is that it's our ticket out of the gutter. Now finish your drink. We move in an hour. Kenji's heart hammered against his ribs. The industrial sector. It was a sprawling graveyard of abandoned factories and rust-eaten docks. It was dark, empty, and isolated. It was exactly the kind of place a ghost would hunt. The drive to the warehouse was silent and tense. The rain had started again, that same miserable drizzle from the city center, streaking down the van's grimy windshield. Tetsu drove, his knuckles white on the steering wheel, his earlier bravado replaced by a grim focus. Kageyama sat in the passenger seat, staring out at the decaying urban landscape. Kenji was in the back, huddled amongst empty crates, his quirk doing him no good in the dim, rattling space. The darkness he saw with his eyes was nothing compared to the darkness he felt in his gut. They passed the last flickering streetlight, plunging into the labyrinth of the industrial zone. The buildings here were skeletal, their windows like vacant eyes. Weeds grew through cracks in the asphalt. It felt like a place the world had forgotten. This is it, Kageyama said, pointing to a massive, corrugated metal structure looming ahead. Warehouse 7. There were no lights on inside, but a single truck was parked near the loading bay, its engine idling. Security looks even lighter than you said, Tetsu grunted, a hint of his arrogance returning. 2 guys, maybe 3 in the truck. This is gonna be a cakewalk. Don't get cocky, Kageyama warned. Check the perimeter. Kenji, you're with me. Tetsu, circle around back. We go in on my signal. Kenji's mouth was dry as dust as he followed Kageyama out of the van. The air was cold and smelled of rust and damp concrete. They crept along the side of the building, keeping to the deepest shadows. Kenji's night vision quirk activated, turning the world into a landscape of muted grays and blacks. It made the shadows seem deeper, more menacing. They reached the corner and peered around. The loading bay door was slightly ajar. The truck was still idling, its diesel engine a lonely rumble in the oppressive quiet. Where are the lookouts? Kenji whispered. Probably inside, staying out of the rain. Kageyama muttered, though a line of tension was visible in his shoulders. Something's not right. It's too quiet. He pulled out a small radio. Tetsu status? Static. Tetsu report. More static, then a short, sharp burst of it, like a gasp. Then silence. A cold dread, sharp and painful, lanced through Kenji. Kageyama's face had gone pale in the gloom. He tried the radio again, his voice tight. Tetsu! A new sound cut through the night. A low, rhythmic thump, thump, thump. It was coming from the back of the warehouse, where they'd sent Tetsu. Kageyama pulled a pistol from his jacket, his movements jerky. Stay here, he hissed at Kenji, before creeping back the way they came. Kenji, paralyzed by fear, didn't argue. He pressed himself against the cold metal wall, his breathing ragged. He was alone. The thumping sound stopped. A new sound replaced it. A wet, tearing noise followed by a choked, gurgling scream that was abruptly cut off. It was Kageyama. Kenji's blood ran cold. He had to run. He had to get back to the van. He turned ready to bolt, but a voice from the shadows of the loading bay froze him in his tracks. It was a strange voice, layered and synthetic, like a machine trying to imitate a human whisper. It was cold, devoid of inflection, and it seemed to come from everywhere at once. Leaving so soon? Kenji slowly turned his head. A figure was detaching itself from the deeper darkness under the loading bay's awning. He was tall, clad in a dark, practical suit of what looked like reinforced body armor, segmented at the joints for flexibility. A heavy, dark green hood was pulled low over his face, and beneath it, a full mask of black, unreflective metal covered every inch of his head. There were no eye holes, no mouth slit, just a smooth, terrifyingly blank surface. And all around him, crackling like a contained storm, was the energy. The Vidian lightning. It wasn't bright or heroic. It was a sickly, predatory green that cast flickering, monstrous shadows on the wall behind him. It was him. The ghost. Vidian. Kenji couldn't scream. The sound was trapped in his throat, a knot of pure terror. Vidian took a step forward, his movements utterly silent. Your friends won't be joining you. As if on cue, a heavy shape was tossed out from the alley behind the warehouse. It landed with a wet, heavy thud in a puddle nearby. It was Tetsu. Or what was left of him. His arms were twisted behind his back at an impossible angle. One of his legs was clearly broken, the bone jutting out from the fabric of his pants. His signature slag fists were shattered, the hardened metal cracked and broken, his hands a mangled mess. He was unconscious, but alive, moaning softly. Another shape was dragged into the dim light. Kageyama. He was conscious, his face a mask of agony and disbelief. His pistol was gone, and one of his arms hung uselessly at his side, obviously dislocated. Dark, whip-like tendrils of pure energy were wrapped around his torso, holding him effortlessly. Kenji finally found his voice, a pathetic whimper. Please, we didn't do anything. The blank mask tilted. You were here to hijack a shipment for the Kazuki cartel, the synthetic voice stated. It wasn't a question. The shipment in that truck, he gestured with his head toward the idling vehicle, contains 12 refugees, including 4 children, who were promised safe passage and are instead being sold into forced labor. You call that nothing? Kenji's world tilted. He hadn't known. He swore he hadn't known. But would it have mattered? He probably would have done it anyway, too scared of Kageyama to refuse. The realization hit him like a physical blow. I didn't know. Ignorance is not innocence, Vidian said, the cold words cutting through the air. He turned his attention to Kageyama, who was trembling in the grip of the black whips. You, however, did know. You brokered the deal. I've read your files. Every dirty little secret. The dark tendrils, which Kenji now recognized with a jolt of horror as the hero Deku's black whip, tightened their grip. Kageyama let out a choked gasp. Who are you? Kageyama wheezed. I'm the consequence, Vidian replied. He began to walk towards them, each step deliberate and heavy. Kenji could feel the oppressive aura rolling off him, a palpable wave of cold, focused rage. This wasn't a hero coming to make an arrest. This was an executioner coming to deliver a sentence. Suddenly, the side door of the warehouse burst open. 2 more thugs, the cartel's men, charged out, brandishing makeshift weapons, a lead pipe and a crowbar. They had clearly heard the commotion. Hey! What the hell is going on here? The one with the pipe yelled. Vidian didn't even turn his head. A new quirk flared to life. Kenji saw a brief, shimmering distortion in the air around the man, and then he moved. It wasn't just speed. He seemed to be in multiple places at once, a green-tinged blur of motion. The man with the pipe swung wildly. Vidian was no longer there. He was behind him. A single, precise kick, wreathed in green lightning, connected with the back of the man's knee. The snap of bone was as loud as a gunshot in the night. The man went down, screaming. The second thug, seeing this, hesitated for a fatal second. Vidian closed the distance instantly. He didn't punch. He didn't kick. He moved with a terrifying, clinical precision. One hand shot out, striking the man's elbow, hyperextending the joint. The other hand delivered a chopping blow to his collarbone. The man crumpled without a sound, his weapon clattering to the pavement. It had taken less than 3 seconds. It was brutal, efficient, and utterly devoid of heroic flair. It was the deconstruction of a threat piece by painful piece. Vidian came to a stop, the green lightning subsiding, the black tendrils still holding Kageyama fast. The blank mask turned back to Kenji. The boy was frozen, his mind unable to process the sheer violence he had just witnessed. He had seen heroes fight on TV. It was all bright colors and grand pronouncements. This was anatomy. This was pain. I have already uploaded your entire digital history to every major news network and hero agency, Kageyama. The synthetic voice droned. Your show corporations, your blackmail files, your list of clients. By morning you will have nowhere left to hide. Every ally you have will turn on you to save their own skin. Your power, your influence, it's all gone. Kageyama's eyes went wide with a horror that transcended physical pain. He was a broker. His information, his reputation, was his lifeblood. Vidian hadn't just beaten him, he had erased him from the underworld. Why? Kageyama choked out. Why not just turn me in? Because men like you always find a way to slip through the cracks, Vidian said. The black whip squeezed, and Kageyama cried out. You have lawyers. You have connections. You get a reduced sentence. You get out. You hurt more people. The cycle continues. I am here to break the cycle. The black tendrils unwound and retracted back into Vidian's arms. Kageyama collapsed to the ground, a broken, sobbing mess. Vidian looked down at him, his posture radiating nothing but contempt. The authorities will be here in 10 minutes. They will find you, your men, and the evidence of your crimes. They will also find the people in that truck, who will be safely delivered to a legitimate hero agency. He had it all planned. Every move, every outcome. He wasn't just a fighter, he was a master strategist. Then, the terrifying, blank mask turned to face Kenji one last time. Kenji squeezed his eyes shut, bracing for the bone-shattering impact he knew was coming. He had been part of it. He was guilty. He deserved it. But the blow never came. He cautiously opened his eyes. Vidian was standing right in front of him, so close Kenji could feel the static charge in the air. The featureless mask seemed to stare right through him, into the pathetic, terrified core of his being. You are young, the voice said, and for the first time, Kenji thought he detected a flicker of something beneath the synthetic tone. It wasn't pity. It was weariness. You are weak, and you walk a path that will lead you to this. He gestured to the broken men on the ground. Or to a grave. He reached out, and Kenji flinched violently, falling backward onto the wet ground. Vidian's hand stopped. This is your only warning, the voice said, the cold finality returning. Get out of this city. Leave this life behind. Find something else. Anything else. If I ever see your face in Musafu again, I will not be this merciful. He turned without another word and strode towards the idling truck. He opened the back, and the faint, terrified sobs of children could be heard. He didn't speak to them. He simply placed a small, untraceable burner phone on the floor of the truck. The people on the other end of this line will help you, he said, his voice still distorted, but perhaps a fraction softer. Do exactly as they say. He slammed the doors shut, strode to the cab, and hot-wired it in seconds. With a roar of the engine, the truck pulled away, disappearing into the labyrinthine darkness of the industrial park. Kenji was left alone in the rain, surrounded by the moaning, broken bodies of his former crew. The distant wail of sirens was just beginning to grow. He looked at the mangled form of Tetsu, the humiliated ruin of Kageyama, and the two unconscious thugs. He looked at his own trembling hands. He had stared into the eyes of the ghost that haunted his city. And the ghost had stared back and let him go. He didn't wait for the sirens to get closer. He scrambled to his feet and he ran. He ran from the warehouse, from the broken men, from the life he had chosen. He ran with the cold, synthetic words echoing in his head, a final, terrifying judgment. He ran until his lungs burned and his legs gave out, not stopping until the grimy, haunted industrial sector was far behind him. He ran, knowing with an absolute, soul-deep certainty that he would never, ever come back. The ghost of Musafu had given him a second chance, and he was not foolish enough to waste it. The underworld could keep its monsters. He was out. The air in the main briefing room of the Hero Public Safety Commission's emergency headquarters was stale and artificially cold. It was a place designed for bad news, a sterile white box of recessed lighting and dark, polished surfaces where morality was weighed on scales of public perception and collateral damage. A massive holographic display dominated one wall, currently showing a map of Musafu, pockmarked with dozens of blinking icons. Green icons for incidents attributed to the vigilante Vidian, and red for the corresponding drop in other reported violent crimes. At the head of the long table sat Director General Tanaka, a woman whose face seemed permanently etched with disappointment. Flanking her were the highest-ranking officials left who hadn't been disgraced or killed in the war. Projected on holographic seats were the faces of Endeavor and Hawks, both looking grim and weary from their endless patrols. Physically present were a handful of strategists, and at the far end of the table, two men who seemed distinctly out of place in the clinical environment, Detective Naomasa Tsukachi and a slouched, tired-looking Shota Aizawa. "The numbers are problematic," Tanaka began, her voice crisp and devoid of emotion. She gestured to the map. "In the 6 months since the entity known as Vidian began his campaign, violent crime rates in his designated patrol zones, primarily the Kamino, Dagoba, and central residential sectors, have plummeted by an average of 64%. Muggings, assaults, drug trafficking, illegal quirk usage, all have seen a precipitous decline." A murmur went through the room. In a world starved for good news, a statistic like that was a banquet. However, Tanaka continued, her tone sharpening, reports of aggravated assault, maiming, and what can only be described as torture have increased by over 1,000%. The perpetrators of these crimes are, without exception, known villains or criminal associates. The sole source of these new incidents is Vidian himself. She swiped a hand, and the map was replaced by a series of images that made several people in the room flinch. The first showed the broken, twisted form of the villain Hammerhead, his arms and legs bent at angles nature never intended. The next was a crime scene photo from a warehouse, where a dozen members of a human trafficking ring were found systematically crippled, each with identical injuries to their dominant hand and kneecaps. The last was a high-angle shot of the Musafu sky spire, with 3 figures dangling precariously, sheets of paper stapled to their expensive suits. "He does not kill," Tanaka stated. "He does not steal. He does not target civilians. His sole purpose appears to be the punishment of those he deems guilty. He is methodical, ruthlessly efficient, and surgically precise." She turned her gaze to the 2 men at the end of the table. "Detective Tsukachi, your report?" Tsukachi stood, his face grim. He held a datapad, but he didn't need to look at it. The facts were burned into his memory. Vidian's methods are twofold: physical incapacitation and systemic destruction. Physically, his targets are left with injuries that are, in the words of our medical examiners, career-ending. He seems to have an expert understanding of anatomy and quirk mechanics, targeting weaknesses to inflict maximum, non-lethal damage. The psychological impact on the underworld has been profound. He's cultivated a boogeyman persona that is proving more effective at deterring street-level crime than 2 decades of hero patrols. He paused, letting the weight of that statement sink in. Secondly, and perhaps more troubling, is his skill with information warfare. The Slasher Syndicate takedown was preceded by a data leak that exposed their entire network of corrupt officials. The Kazuki cartel operation was accompanied by a hack that drained their offshore accounts and funneled the untraceable cryptocurrency to a dozen different victim support charities. He is not just a brawler, he is a ghost in the machine. He is judge, jury, and a terrifyingly effective executioner. The holographic image of Endeavor grunted, his fiery beard flickering. "So he's powerful and smart. What about his quirk? We need to know what we're facing." All eyes turned to Aizawa. The Erasure hero leaned forward, elbows on the table, his tired eyes scanning the images of carnage. His expression was darker than usual, a deep, troubled look that went beyond his typical weariness. "It's not one quirk," Aizawa said, his voice a low rasp. It's several. Eyewitness accounts and security footage fragments show evidence of a strength and speed enhancer, a mobility quirk that allows for something like flight or sustained levitation, and some kind of black, energy-based capture weapon. He zoomed in on a blurry frame from a security camera, showing a dark tendril lashing out. The combination is unusual. But it's not the power that's the primary concern. It's the application. He looked up, his gaze sweeping over the assembled officials. This individual fights with a level of analytical prowess that is, frankly, terrifying. He doesn't just overpower his opponents, he dissects them. He anticipates their moves, exploits their quirks' weaknesses, and neutralizes them with minimal wasted energy. It's a chillingly familiar brand of combat analysis. In every fight, he seems to know his opponent's quirk better than they do themselves. The only person I've ever seen with that kind of innate, real-time strategic ability. Aizawa's voice trailed off. His mind unwillingly supplied a name. A face. A shock of green hair and a spattering of freckles. Midoriya. He pushed the thought away. It was impossible. It was a wound he refused to probe. It's a one-in-a-generation talent. He finished, his voice strained. And it's being used to tear down the very system we are trying to rebuild. Director Tanaka nodded grimly. I agree. Whatever short-term benefits his actions may provide, they are poison to the rule of law. He is undermining public trust in heroes and setting a precedent for mob justice. As of this morning, Vidian is classified as an S-rank threat. His capture is a top priority for all active heroes. Use any means necessary. Aizawa's fists clenched under the table. Capture. For a boy who used to break his own bones to save a single person, it felt like a blasphemy. But this Vidian, this wasn't the boy he knew. This was a monster wearing a familiar shadow. Toshinori Yagi sat in the dim quiet of his apartment. It had become a mausoleum. Not just for his own career, but for the future he had once so fervently believed in. Piles of old case files sat on his coffee table, untouched. The curtains were drawn, shutting out a world he no longer felt a part of. His only connection to the outside was the television, which was always on, tuned to a 24-hour news channel. It was a form of self-flagellation, watching the slow decay of the society he had given his life to protect. He was a ghost in his own life, haunted by the memory of two people. The smiling, gentle face of Inko Midoriya, and the bright, hopeful eyes of her son, the boy he had chosen, the boy he had failed. The note Izuku had left behind was seared into his memory, a testament to his failure as a mentor, as a symbol, as a father. You were wrong, the news anchor's voice droned on, a litany of small disasters and fragile hopes. Then, a news segment began. Tonight, we have exclusive, albeit shaky, footage of the vigilante Vidian during his recent dismantling of a suspected human trafficking operation in the industrial sector. Toshinori's hollow eyes drifted to the screen. He'd seen the reports, heard the name. He'd dismissed it as just another symptom of society's illness, another disillusioned vigilante taking things too far. The footage played. It was from a bystander's phone, zoomed in and unstable. It showed a dark, hooded figure surrounded by that sickly green light. It showed the brutal, efficient takedown of several armed men. Toshinori watched with detached sorrow. This was the world now. This was the consequence of his absence. Then, Vidian moved to intercept a thug charging with a lead pipe, and Toshinori's breath caught in his throat. It wasn't a big movement. It was a subtle pivot, a shift of weight onto the ball of the left foot before launching into a low, sweeping kick aimed at the opponent's knee. A flicker of motion, but Toshinori knew it. He knew that pivot. He had spent weeks drilling it into young Midoriya. It was a modification of a shoot-style kick, designed to maintain balance during a rapid change in direction at 45% power output. Izuku had struggled with it, spending hours in the gym until his legs burned, muttering his analyses under his breath. The angle of the knee, the torque of the hip. Toshinori had watched him perfect it. He leaned forward, his heart beginning to hammer against his frail ribs. He grabbed the remote, his hand trembling, and rewound the footage, playing it back in slow motion. There. The pivot. And there. As Vidian moved again, He used a short burst of what looked like air pressure from his foot to propel him sideways, a micro version of air force. And then, the most damning piece of evidence. The black whips. They lashed out not to ensnare, but to constrict, to crush a villain's weapon. The way they coiled before striking, the tight, efficient spiral. It was identical to how Izuku had finally mastered controlling Black Whip, a technique he'd been so proud of. "No!" Tashinori whispered, the sound a dry crackle in the silent room. He frantically searched online, pulling up every piece of available footage of Vidian. A grainy clip from a rooftop camera. A dashcam video. A news helicopter shot. He watched them all, his horror mounting with every frame. The way Vidian used float not just to hover, but to make micro-adjustments in midair to change his trajectory. The telltale shimmer of FA gene being stored and released for a burst of speed. It wasn't just one familiar move. It was a symphony of them. A dark, twisted, brutal symphony, but it was Izuku's fighting style, perverted and weaponized for maximum pain. The timeline slammed into him like a physical blow. Vidian had first been reported a week after Izuku vanished. 6 months ago. He stumbled back from the television, his hand flying to his mouth to stifle a cry. The note. "You can make sure they never hurt anyone again." The words were no longer just a boy's grief-stricken cry. They were a mission statement. He saw it all with sickening clarity. The boy who felt the weight of the world, who believed saving people was his only purpose, had lost the one person he couldn't live without. And in the ashes of that loss, his core programming had been corrupted. The unwavering drive to save had twisted into an unwavering drive to punish. The hero who would break his own body to stop a villain was now a monster who would break a villain's body to stop a crime. The man who had once been the symbol of peace crumpled into his chair and wept, not with sorrow, but with a raw, terrifying horror. He was mourning a boy who wasn't dead, but who might be something infinitely worse. The common room of the Heights Alliance dormitory was a shadow of its former self. The usual boisterous energy, the laughter and friendly arguments, had been replaced by a heavy, somber quiet. The disappearance of Izuku Midoriya 6 months ago had been a wound that refused to heal. It had left a gaping hole in the heart of Class 1A. They had searched, they had followed every false lead, they had pleaded with the teachers for information, but he was simply gone. A ghost. Now, they were gathered around the television, watching the same news report that had shattered All Might's world. The grim footage of Vidian's latest act of brutal justice played out in front of them. "He saved those people," Achiko Uraraka said softly, her voice filled with a desperate need to find a silver lining. Her brow was furrowed, her usual bright optimism clouded by the world's harsh realities. "The news said they were going to be sold. He stopped it. That's heroic, isn't it?" Tenya Ida, standing stiffly beside the couch, adjusted his glasses, his expression one of stern disapproval. "Uraraka, his motives are inconsequential. Observe his methods. He acted as judge, jury, and executioner, inflicting grievous bodily harm upon multiple individuals. He operates outside the law, and that makes him a villain. A true hero inspires trust in the system, they do not spit upon it. His hands chopped the air for emphasis, but the movements lacked their usual conviction. He was trying to convince himself as much as anyone else." From his seat on a lone armchair, Shoto Todoroki watched the screen with an unnerving stillness. His mismatched eyes seemed to see beyond the violence on the screen. "The system is broken, Ida," he said, his voice a low monotone. "People are desperate. This Vidian, he isn't doing this because he enjoys chaos." He looked around at his classmates, his gaze lingering on Uraraka and Ida. "That level of focused rage, that coldness, it doesn't come from ambition or greed. It comes from pain. Someone took everything from him, and this is all he has left." His words hung in the air, a chillingly accurate assessment that no one wanted to contemplate. Across the room, leaning against the kitchen counter, was Katsuki Bakugo. He wasn't watching the TV. He was meticulously cleaning his gauntlets, his movements sharp and aggressive. But his usual explosive aura was gone, replaced by a tense, simmering silence that was far more unnerving. He had grown quieter these past 6 months, his anger honed into a sharp, dangerous edge. He spent every spare moment in the gym, or out on patrol, pushing himself past his limits with a desperate, frantic energy. He was listening to every word his classmates said. Every time the name Vidian was mentioned, his shoulders would tense. He had seen the clips. He had felt a nauseating, impossible flicker of familiarity in the way the vigilante moved. He refused to let the thought form completely in his mind. It was too monstrous, but it was there, a splinter under his skin. He wasn't just training to be the number one hero anymore. He was training for a confrontation he prayed would never come. He was hunting for a ghost, determined to drag him back into the light, or be consumed by the darkness himself. His atonement for a childhood of cruelty was to find the boy he had tormented and, for the first time in his life, be the one to save him. Whoever he is, he needs to be stopped, Kirishima said, his usual bright tones subdued. This isn't manly. It's just cruel. Bakugo slammed a piece of his gauntlet down on the counter, the loud bang making everyone jump. Shut up, all of you! He roared, the sudden explosion of sound shocking the room into silence. He whirled on them, his red eyes blazing with a fire that looked more like agony than anger. What the hell do you idiots know about it? You sit here talking like it's some damn philosophy debate. You have no idea what's out there. Without another word, he snatched his gear and stormed out of the common room, slamming the door behind him. The remaining students were left in a stunned silence, the ghost of Izuku Midoriya and the new, terrifying ghost of Vidian merging into one uncomfortable, unspoken question. The rain had started again, casting a shimmering, distorted glaze over the city lights. On a small, pedestrian bridge overlooking a quiet canal, two figures stood in the downpour. One was the skeletal, withered form of Tashinori Yagi, hunched inside a large trench coat, looking like a scarecrow someone had left in the rain. The other was Detective Tsukachi, his expression grim, his shoulders slumped with the weight of his friend's terrible theory. You're certain, Tashinori? Tsukachi asked, his voice low. I have never been more certain, or more terrified, of anything in my life. All Might rasped, his voice hoarse with grief. The way he moves, Naomasa. His quirk usage, it's a perfect match for young Midoriya's abilities. A dark mirror of everything I taught him. Tsukachi sighed, running a hand over his tired face. His quirk, human lie detector, was useless here. All Might was speaking his truth, a truth born of gut-wrenching certainty. The boy, he had the heart of a true hero. More than anyone I've ever met. For him to become this, a heart can be broken, All Might said, his voice trembling. And his was shattered into a million pieces. He lost his mother and I fed him ideals. I told him he could save everyone. That naive belief was the foundation of his entire being. When that foundation crumbled, it seems his soul crumbled with it. They stood in silence for a long moment, the only sound the gentle patter of rain on the pavement. What do we do? Tsukachi finally asked. The HPSC has declared him an S-rank threat. They want him captured or neutralized. All Might's head snapped up, a flicker of the old fire in his sunken eyes. No. We can't let them get to him. If Endeavor or Hawks corners him, they won't understand. They'll see a villain and they'll use overwhelming force. They could kill him, Naomasa. The thought was a physical pain, or worse, they could push him so far he does something that he can truly never come back from. Then what's your plan, Tashinori? All Might looked out at the city, at the dark, sprawling metropolis that had created this monster from his greatest hope. I don't know. But I know it has to be us. It has to be the people who knew him. We need to confront him, to reach him. We need to look him in the eye and see for ourselves if there is anything left of the boy we knew. He turned to his friend, his expression pleading. I need proof. Undeniable proof. I need to see him up close. Help me, Naomasa. Help me find my boy. Tsukachi looked at the broken man before him, the former symbol of peace, now just a grieving father. He gave a single, solemn nod. All right, Tashinori. We'll find him. But be prepared. The boy you find might not be the boy you lost. The night was a predator. It stalked the neon-drenched canyons of Musafu, its breath a cold, damp wind that smelled of rain and exhaust fumes. For Katsuki Bakugo, the night had become a hunting ground. Every shadow was a potential hiding place, every distant siren a call to action. He moved through the urban jungle with a focused, explosive grace, a predator hunting a ghost. 6 months of this. 6 months of pushing past his limits, of turning his grief and guilt into fuel. He'd studied the Vidian sightings with an obsessive, terrifying intensity that even Aizawa found unnerving. He'd memorized the maps of his patrol routes, analyzed the patterns of his attacks, cross-referenced them with criminal activity reports he'd strong-armed from the police. He wasn't just looking for a vigilante. He was trying to get inside his head. And the more he learned, the more a sickening certainty coiled in his gut. The fighting style was a brutal, efficient perversion of what he'd seen 1,000 times in training. The way he'd use a feint to draw an opponent in, the specific angle of a kick designed to bypass a guard, it was all Deku. Twisted, cold, and horrifyingly effective, but it was him. Bakugo had spent his entire life with Izuku Midoriya as his shadow, his rival, his punching bag, and finally, his equal. He knew how the damn nerd thought. He knew how he fought. Tonight, Bakugo had a lead. A real one. Kageyama, the information broker Vidian had systematically dismantled a few weeks back, had been singing like a canary from his hospital bed. Desperate to curry favor, he'd given the authorities everything, including details on a high-level human trafficking auction scheduled for tonight. It was run by the remnants of the Shai Hasaikai, regrouping in the chaos. It was exactly the kind of scum Vidian targeted. Cruel. Vile. The worst of the worst. Bakugo hadn't told anyone where he was going. Not Aizawa, not Best Jeanist, and certainly not All Might. This was his burden. His responsibility. He felt the weight of every taunt, every sneering quirkless loser, every explosion he'd ever set off in Deku's face. He had helped forge the boy's black and white view of the world, a world of villains to be defeated and heroes who always win. He had helped create the fragile pedestal Deku had placed heroism upon, and if that pedestal had shattered, Bakugo felt he was the one who had to sweep up the damn pieces. He landed on a rooftop overlooking a disused shipping warehouse in the industrial port, his gauntlets glinting in the moonlight. The building was dark, but he could feel the low thrum of activity inside. He'd been tracking the Shai Hasaikai's movements for days. The auction was happening on the top floor. He was about to move in, to blow the damn doors off and handle it himself, when he saw it. A flicker of movement on the adjacent rooftop. A dark shape, cloaked in shadow, observing the same building. Bakugo's heart hammered against his ribs. It was him. He watched as the figure, Vidian, dropped silently from the roof, vanishing into the alley below. Bakugo didn't follow immediately. He waited, his mind racing. He couldn't just charge in. He needed to corner him. He needed to confront him away from civilians, away from other heroes. Alone. The screams started a few minutes later. Not screams of terror from victims, but sharp, agonized cries from the villains. Muffled thuds and the sickening crunch of bone echoed faintly from the warehouse. There were no flashy explosions, no grand pronouncements. Just a quiet, methodical, and brutal disassembly. Bakugo clenched his fists, sweat beading on his brow. Every instinct screamed at him to go in, to stop the carnage. But he forced himself to wait. He had to trust that the nerd, somewhere inside that monster, still wouldn't cross the final line. That he wouldn't kill. After what felt like an eternity, the sounds of fighting died down. A few minutes later, the side door of the warehouse creaked open. Vidian emerged, his dark, hooded form silhouetted against the faint light from within. The Vidian energy around him was a low, angry hum. He paused for a moment, his masked face turning as if surveying the rooftops, and Bakugo's breath caught in his throat. His danger sense. Deku's new quirk. He knew he was being watched. Vidian didn't flee. He shot a line of black whip to the edge of the roof opposite Bakugo, and propelled himself upwards, landing with a soft thud on the rain-slicked gravel. He stood there, a solitary, menacing figure against the backdrop of the city lights, waiting. It was a challenge. An invitation. "Took you long enough, you bastard!" Bakugo growled to himself. He ignited his palms, the familiar scent of nitroglycerin filling the air. With a deafening roar, he launched himself across the gap between the buildings, an orange comet of fury against the dark sky. He landed hard, skidding to a halt 20 feet from the silent figure. The rain began to fall again, a cold, heavy downpour that plastered his hair to his forehead and sizzled on his hot gauntlets. So the ghost finally decides to show his face. Bakugo spat, his voice a low growl. Or not his face. Still hiding like a damned coward, Vidian remained motionless, his head tilted slightly. The blank, featureless mask was unnerving, reflecting the city lights like a black mirror. The synthetic voice, cold and layered, emerged from the mask. Dynamite! You should not be here. The hell I shouldn't! Bakugo roared, his anger flaring. I'm a hero! This is my city! I'm here to bring in a scumbag villain who thinks he can play judge and jury. He didn't wait for a response. He blasted forward, using a series of smaller, controlled explosions to propel himself in an erratic, unpredictable pattern. He closed the distance in a heartbeat, pulling back his right arm for a devastating right hook. AP shot! He expected his opponent to dodge, to block, to do something. Instead, Vidian met him head-on. The green lightning flared, and he moved with a speed that was almost too fast to track. He didn't meet Bakugo's fist. He sidestepped inside the arc of the punch, his own hand shooting out. It wasn't a punch. It was a precise, open-palm strike to the joint of Bakugo's shoulder. A white-hot, electric pain shot through Bakugo's arm. His entire right side went numb, the punch dissipating into nothing. He stumbled, his momentum carrying him past his target. He growled in frustration and spun around, unleashing another blast with his left hand. Vidian was already moving, flowing like water around the attack. He used float to lift himself just inches off the ground, letting the explosion scorch the gravel beneath him. He was using his quirks with a seamless, terrifying efficiency that he never possessed in school. This wasn't a panicked, frantic fighter. This was a master of his own abilities. Stand still and fight me, you bastard! Bakugo screamed, his frustration mounting. I am fighting you. The synthetic voice replied, devoid of any emotion. You are simply outmatched. The calm, analytical statement was more infuriating than any taunt. It was the kind of thing Deku would mutter in his notebooks, and hearing it from this thing made Bakugo's blood boil. He changed tactics. He stopped trying for a knockout blow and began laying down a wide, suppressive fire, blanketing the area around Vidian with explosions. He was trying to box him in, to limit his mobility. Stun grenade! A blinding flash erupted from his palm, designed to disorient. But as the light faded, Vidian was gone. Bakugo scanned the rooftop, his senses on high alert. A whisper of movement from above. He looked up just in time to see Vidian descending upon him, black whipped tendrils lashing out like striking snakes. Bakugo countered with a wide-area blast, forcing the tendrils back, but it was a feint. While he was focused on the whips, Vidian used the opening to land on the roof behind him. Bakugo spun around, but he was too slow. A brutal kick, wreathed in green lightning, slammed into the back of his knee. His leg buckled, and he fell to one knee with a cry of pain. Before he could recover, Vidian was on him. He grabbed Bakugo's left arm, the one holding his primary gauntlet, and twisted. There was a sickening crunch of metal and wiring as the complex machinery of the gauntlet was crushed in his grip. My gauntlet! Bakugo choked out, a mix of pain and fury in his voice. A crutch, the synthetic voice stated coldly. You rely too much on your support gear. With his left arm disabled and his right shoulder screaming in protest, Bakugo was at a severe disadvantage. He grit his teeth, ignoring the pain, and swung his body around, trying to land a point-blank explosion with his damaged hand. Vidian was faster. He sidestepped the clumsy attack and delivered a single, precise chop to the side of Bakugo's neck. Bakugo's world exploded in a shower of static. His vision swam, his muscles went limp. He collapsed onto the wet gravel, his body refusing to obey his commands. He could only lie there, his cheek pressed against the cold, rough surface, as the rain washed over him. He was defeated. Utterly and completely defeated, and his opponent didn't even seem to be breathing hard. Footsteps crunched on the gravel, stopping right beside his head. He could feel the oppressive, electric hum of Vidian's power. It's over, the voice said. It wasn't triumphant. It was just a statement of fact. Bakugo coughed, a ragged, pained sound. He forced himself to turn his head, to look up at the towering, hooded figure. He couldn't see a face, just that terrifying, blank mask. Rage, humiliation, and a dawning, horrifying certainty churned within him. You fight like him! Bakugo rasped, his voice barely a whisper. The words felt like poison on his tongue. You fight like a damn nerd who spends too much time mumbling in his notebooks. The figure went perfectly still. The low hum of the Vidian energy flickered, for a moment becoming unsteady. For the first time since the fight began, the cold, implacable wall of his opponent had cracked. Bakugo pushed himself up onto one elbow, his body screaming in protest. He spat a mouthful of blood onto the roof. All that quiet analysis, exploiting weaknesses, it's all his damn playbook. So just tell me. His voice was raw, pleading. Is it you? The silence stretched on, thick and heavy, broken only by the drumming of the rain. The masked figure seemed frozen, locked in an internal struggle. The rage that had fueled Bakugo for so long was gone, replaced by a hollow, aching dread. He didn't want the answer. He needed it. Slowly, as if fighting against every instinct, Vidian's hand lifted. It trembled slightly as it reached for the side of the mask. There was a faint hiss of depressurizing seals, and he pulled the helmet off. The hood fell back, revealing the face beneath. It was Izuku Midoriya, but it wasn't. The face was harder, thinner, all the boyish roundness carved away by grief and exhaustion. His hair was a matted, unruly mess, plastered to his forehead by the rain. A new scar, thin and white, cut diagonally across the bridge of his nose. But the real change was in his eyes. The bright, emerald green that had once been filled with so much life, so much hope and determination, was gone. In its place was a cold, empty stillness. They were the eyes of a soldier who had seen too much war, of a man who had lost everything and had nothing left to lose. They were dead eyes. Bakugo stared, his own eyes wide with a horror that eclipsed his physical pain. The ghost had a face, and it was the face of his oldest friend, Deku. The name escaped his lips, a broken, disbelieving whisper. Izuku's expression didn't change. The cold emptiness in his eyes remained. When he finally spoke, his voice was not the synthetic drone of the mask, but it was just as chilling. It was his own voice, but stripped of all its former warmth and emotion. It was flat. Dead. Hello, Kaken, he said. The old nickname, spoken with such profound emptiness, was like a physical blow. Bakugo felt the air leave his lungs. All the fight, all the rage, drained out of him, leaving him feeling cold and hollow on the wet rooftop. What have you done? Bakugo managed to choke out. Look at you. What the hell is this? This is justice, Izuku replied, his voice level. It's what the heroes are too weak, too scared, or too corrupt to do themselves. I take out the trash. Permanently. Permanently? By breaking their bones? By torturing them? Bakugo's voice rose, laced with disbelief and revulsion. This isn't justice, you idiot! This is monstrous. This isn't what a hero does. A flicker of something, a ghost of a bitter, painful emotion, crossed Izuku's face. A hero? He let out a short, sharp, humorless laugh. Heroes save people. That's what All Might taught us, isn't it? Well, I was there. I was holding her hand when she died. My power, the power of a hero, couldn't save her. So I'm not a hero anymore, Kaken. Heroes are a failed experiment. He gestured vaguely back towards the warehouse, where the authorities would soon find the broken bodies of the traffickers. They're all the same. Every last one of them. They're predators. They're bullies. They find someone weaker than them, and they take and they hurt, and they destroy until someone stronger puts them down. His dead eyes locked onto Bakugo's, and the weight of a lifetime of shared history settled between them. They're all just like you were, Kaken. The words struck Bakugo with the force of a physical blow, knocking the breath from his lungs more effectively than any punch. He saw it then. He saw the world through Izuku's shattered lens. He saw his own sneering, childhood face, fists smoking. He saw himself cornering Deku in the schoolyard, mocking him, burning his notebook, telling him to take a swan dive off the roof. He saw a bully, a predator, and he saw the connection Izuku had made in his broken mind. All the villains, All the monsters, they were just bigger, more dangerous versions of the boy who had tormented him his entire life. Guilt, sharp and suffocating, rose in Bakugo's throat. This wasn't just about Inko's death. This was about a foundation of pain that he had helped to lay, brick by brick. Deku! Bakugo started, but the words died in his throat. What could he say? I'm sorry? I've changed? How hollow would that sound now? Izuku's expression remained unchanged. He seemed to be looking right through Bakugo, at a past that was more real to him than the present. The world doesn't understand saving. It doesn't understand mercy. It only understands punishment. It only understands fear. I'm giving them something they can understand. He pulled his hood back up and slid the blank mask back over his face. The oppressive, inhuman persona of Vidian settled back over him like a shroud. The faint hiss of the seals locking into place sounded like a coffin closing. This conversation is over, the synthetic voice said, the last trace of Izuku Midoriya gone once more. He turned to leave, to melt back into the shadows he now called home. Wait! Bakugo yelled, forcing himself to his feet, ignoring the searing pain in his leg and the numbness in his arm. Don't you walk away from me, you damn nerd! This isn't you! This isn't the end! Vidian paused at the edge of the roof but didn't turn around. You're wrong, the voice said, quiet and final. This is the only thing I am now. And it's just the beginning. With that, he stepped off the edge of the building, using float to descend silently into the darkness below. He was gone. Bakugo stood alone on the rooftop, the rain washing the blood from his face, the wind whipping around him. He was shivering, but not from the cold. He looked down at his crushed gauntlet, at his own trembling hands. He had found his ghost. He had confronted him. And he had failed. He had looked into the eyes of his oldest friend and seen a stranger, a monster born from a pain he had helped to create. The distant wail of sirens grew closer, a mournful cry in the heart of the wounded city. Bakugo didn't move. He just stared into the abyss where his friend had disappeared, the weight of his failure a stone in his gut. This was so much worse than he had ever imagined. Toshinori Yagi's apartment had become a cage of his own making, a place where memories and regrets circled like vultures. The sparse furnishings seemed to absorb the silence, the drawn curtains a constant reminder of the world he was hiding from. The only light came from the bluish, flickering glow of a computer monitor, its screen displaying a secure, encrypted video feed. On the screen was the face of Katsuki Bakugo. The boy looked broken. It was the only word for it. The usual arrogant fire in his eyes was banked, replaced by a haunted, hollowed-out look. His arm was in a sling, and a fresh set of stitches traced a line over his eyebrow. He was sitting in a UA infirmary room, the sterile white walls a stark contrast to the darkness in his expression. He had called Toshinori the moment he had been cleared by the medics, his voice on the phone a raw, urgent rasp. He didn't kill me, Bakugo was saying, his voice low and gravelly, as if it pained him to speak. He could have. Easily. He took me apart like I was a damn training dummy. He didn't even break a sweat. Toshinori sat hunched in his chair, his frail body feeling every one of its years. Every word from the boy on the screen was another nail hammered into the coffin of his hope. And you are certain, young Bakugo? Absolutely certain it was him? Bakugo let out a short, bitter laugh that held no humor. He took his mask off. Stood right in front of me. He paused, swallowing hard. It was Deku. But it wasn't. It was like someone scooped out everything that made him who he was and left the empty shell behind. His eyes, all might, they were empty. Toshinori closed his own eyes, a wave of profound, soul-crushing grief washing over him. For weeks, it had been a theory, a terrible suspicion. Now it was a fact. The boy he had gifted with the sacred torch of One for All, the boy he had raised as his successor, the boy he had loved like a son, was out there in the darkness, a monster wearing his face. He talked about his mother. Bakugo continued, his gaze dropping to his lap. About how heroes couldn't save her. About how the whole idea of saving people is a lie. The boy's voice cracked, and a raw, unfamiliar guilt filled his tone. And he said the villains were all just like me. Like I used to be. Just bullies who needed to be put down. The confession hung in the air between them, heavy and suffocating. Tashinori's eyes snapped open. He saw it then, the terrible, tragic line of logic that had formed in Izuku's shattered mind. The cruelty he had endured from Bakugo had become his template for all evil. The failure of heroes to save his mother had become the ultimate proof that the system was broken. It was a philosophy born of pure, undiluted trauma. "This is my fault," Tashinori whispered, the words barely audible. It wasn't a platitude. It was a core, fundamental truth that settled deep in his bones. "No, it's—" Bakugo started, a flash of his old defensive anger returning. "Yes," Tashinori interrupted, his voice gaining a sliver of its old authority, though it was laced with pain. "It is. I found a boy with a pure, selfless heart and a fragile spirit. I handed him the weight of the world and told him he alone had to bear it. I told him he had to be the next symbol of peace. I didn't teach him how to be Izuku Midoriya, the hero. I taught him how to be a pale imitation of All Might. I never prepared him for failure. I never prepared him for loss. And when the ultimate loss came, the entire structure I built for him, it crumbled to dust." He stood up, his movements stiff and pained, and walked to his desk. Lying there, preserved under a glass paperweight, was the note. The note Izuku had left behind on his hospital bed. Tashinori picked it up, his fingers tracing the neat, steady handwriting. He didn't need to read the words. They were branded onto his soul. "You were wrong. You can't save everyone. But you can make sure they never hurt anyone again." Before, they had been the words of a grieving son. Now, hearing Bakugo's report, they were a manifesto. The founding doctrine of the entity known as Vidian. It was a direct, personal rejection of everything All Might stood for. A son's ultimate renunciation of his father's beliefs. "I have to face him," Tashinori said, turning back to the screen. The decision settled over him with the weight of destiny. "You can't," Bakugo protested immediately. "You saw what he did to me. You don't have your power anymore. He'll kill you." The fear in the boy's voice was genuine, a startling display of concern from the usually arrogant teenager. "He will not kill me," Tashinori said with a certainty that surprised even himself. "He is angry at All Might, not at Tashinori Yagi. He is rejecting the symbol, not the man. If there is even a shred of the boy we knew left inside him, he will not kill me." He took a deep, rattling breath. "He left that note for me, young Bakugo. This is a conversation we were always meant to have. I am the only one who can have it." "What are you going to do?" Bakugo asked, his apprehension clear. "I'm going to remind him of where he came from," Tashinori said, his gaze drifting to a framed photo on his wall, a picture of a trash-covered beach, with a small, scrawny boy roaring in triumph atop a mountain of garbage. "I'm going to take him back to the beginning." Detective Tsukachi looked at the skeletal man sitting across from him in the interrogation room they used for sensitive debriefings. The room was gray and featureless, designed to prevent distractions, but Tashinori's focus was entirely inward. "You want to do what?" Tsukachi asked, his voice a mixture of disbelief and alarm. "I need to arrange a meeting," Tashinori repeated, his voice firm. "Not as All Might. Not with a team of heroes. Just me. Alone." "Tashinori, that's insane! We've just had confirmation from young Bakugo that he is dangerously violent and unstable. He's classified as an S-rank threat. Sending you in there alone it's suicide." "It's the only way," Tashinori insisted, leaning forward. His eyes, though sunken, held a fierce conviction. "Any show of force will be seen as a threat. He'll interpret it as heroes coming to capture him, and he will react with violence. It will only validate his worldview. But me, just me, that's different. That's personal. He might listen." Tsukachi ran a hand through his hair, his mind reeling. Every instinct as a police officer screamed that this was a terrible idea. But his instinct as Tashinori's friend, the man who had seen the weight he carried for his lost successor, told him this was inevitable. "And how do you propose we arrange this little chat?" "We can't exactly send him an email. He's a ghost in the machine, you said so yourself," Tashinori countered. "He monitors everything. Hero network chatter, police dispatches, underground forums. He's hunting for information on his next target. We won't send him a direct message. We'll bait the hook and let him find it himself. He slid a folded piece of paper across the table. I need you to use one of your deep cover informants, someone with access to the darkest corners of the web. Have them post a single, encrypted message on a forum you know he watches. No hero names. No direct references. Just this. Sukachi unfolded the paper. On it were 3 simple words: Dagoba Beach. Sunset. He looked up at Tashinori, understanding dawning in his eyes. The place where it all began. The site of Izuka Midoriya's first Herculean trial. The place where Tashinori had first offered him the quirk. It was a place heavy with symbolism, a shared memory that only the two of them would fully comprehend. It's a massive risk, Tashinori, Sukachi said, his voice heavy. If he shows up, you'll be completely vulnerable. I know, Tashinori replied softly. But if there is any hope of reaching my boy, it is a risk I have to take. It is my penance. My failure as a father. Sukachi stared at his friend for a long moment, seeing not the invincible symbol of peace, but a frail, desperate man trying to save his son from the monster he had become. He sighed, a sound of profound resignation. All right, Tashinori. I'll do it. We'll set up a perimeter, 2-mile radius, completely covert. No one goes in unless you give a distress signal. You'll be wired for sound, but that's it. No visible support. You'll be on your own. Tashinori nodded, a flicker of gratitude in his eyes. Thank you, Naomasa. Don't thank me yet, Sukachi said grimly, folding the piece of paper and putting it in his pocket. Just come back in one piece. Both of you. The sun was a bleeding orange wound on the horizon, its fading light painting the clouds in hues of violet and gold. The waves at Dagoba Municipal Beach Park lapped gently against the shore, a soft, rhythmic shushing that was a world away from the city's chaotic heartbeat. The air was cool and tasted of salt. 6 months ago, this place had been a pristine testament to one boy's impossible determination. Now, neglect was beginning to reclaim it. Weeds poked through the promenade's pavement, and a fresh scattering of litter marred the sand near the entrance. A symbol of hope, already starting to tarnish. Tashinori stood on the clean stretch of sand, the part Izuku had cleared first, his ridiculously oversized coat flapping in the sea breeze. He felt small and insignificant against the vastness of the ocean. He had arrived an hour early, walking the length of the beach, his mind flooded with memories. He saw a scrawny, determined boy hauling a refrigerator, his muscles screaming but his eyes burning with resolve. He heard the echo of his own booming laughter, saw the memory of himself in his muscle form, standing atop a mountain of junk as the sun rose. He remembered the boy's tear-streaked face as he offered him the quirk, the moment their lives, their destinies, became intertwined. How had it come to this? How had that bright, shining path led to such profound darkness? The sun dipped below the horizon, plunging the beach into the deep blue twilight. The moment had come. Tashinori stood his ground, his heart a frantic drum against his ribs. He waited. For a long time, there was nothing but the sound of the waves. Doubt began to creep in. Maybe he wouldn't come. Maybe the message was too obscure. Maybe the boy was truly gone, and the monster that remained had no time for ghosts of the past. Then, a subtle shift in the air. A whisper of movement from the shadows near the seawall. Tashinori didn't turn. He just waited, his gaze fixed on the darkening ocean. A figure detached itself from the gloom and walked onto the sand, his boots making no sound. He was cloaked in his dark, armored suit, the hood pulled low, the blank mask reflecting the last vestiges of daylight. The Vidian energy that surrounded him was suppressed, but Tashinori could still feel its cold, oppressive hum. Vidian stopped about 30 feet away. The two figures stood in silence for a full minute, a teacher and his failed student, a father and his lost son, separated by an ocean of pain. You came, Tashinori said, his voice raspy against the sound of the waves. The synthetic voice of the mask replied, as cold and empty as the void between stars. You knew I would. This place, it was a calculated risk on your part. An appeal to sentiment. Is there any sentiment left to appeal to, young Midoriya? Tashinori asked, finally turning to face him. He didn't flinch from the terrifying, inhuman visage. He looked at it as if he could see the boy beneath. "The boy you knew is dead," the mask stated. "He died in a destroyed apartment, holding his mother's hand. You're speaking to his ghost." Tashinori took a slow, deliberate step forward. "No. I refuse to believe that. The boy I knew was the strongest person I ever met. Not because of his power, but because of his heart. A heart that big doesn't just die. It can be wounded. It can be broken. But it can be mended." "You're a fool," Vidian spat, the synthetic voice laced with contempt. "Your sentiment, your ideals, they're worthless. They are luxuries the world cannot afford. They are the lies you told me, the lies you told everyone, to make them feel safe while the monsters gathered at the door." "It was not a lie!" Tashinori's voice rose, filled with a pained passion. "It was a belief. A hope. It was the promise that we can be better, that we must strive to save everyone we can, because every life is precious. The very ideal that you once championed." He took another step. "Look at this place, Izuku. Remember what you did here. This wasn't about power. This was about proving you had the heart of a hero long before you had a quirk to match. You cleaned this entire beach not for fame, not for glory, but because it was the right thing to do. Because you wanted to give this small piece of the world back to the people. Where is that boy?" For a moment, the figure in the mask was silent. Tashinori could almost feel the internal conflict raging within the suit of armor. He pressed on, his voice softening, pleading, "Son, what you are doing is born from a pain I cannot even imagine. But this path of vengeance, it will not heal you. It will only consume you. It will not bring her back. It will only destroy the son she was so proud of." At the mention of his mother, the Vidian energy around Vidian flared violently. The sand at his feet sizzled. "Do not speak her name!" The voice that roared from the mask was no longer purely synthetic. It was a distorted fusion of the modulator and Izuku's own raw, grief-stricken voice, a sound of pure agony. "You have no right!" He pointed a trembling, armored finger at Tashinori. "Your way failed her. Your system, your laws, your pathetic, smiling heroes, they failed. A man you heroes had already caught. A man who should have been locked away forever, was free to walk into her home and butcher her. Where was her hero then, All Might? Where were you?" The accusation struck Tashinori with the force of a physical blow. He staggered back, the guilt a crushing weight on his chest. He had no answer. Because the boy was right. The system had failed. He had failed. My way makes sure that never happens again." Vidian continued, his voice shaking with contained rage. "The men I stopped tonight? The ones young Bakugo so heroically tried to apprehend? They weren't just traffickers. They were the last remnants of the Shai Hasaikai. They were experimenting on children again, trying to recreate the quirk-destroying drug. If I had left them to the heroes, they would have been arrested. They would have gotten lawyers. They would have hidden their research. Maybe some of them would have even cut a deal. But now, they will never hurt another child again. I have made certain of it. My way gets results. It provides a finality that your pathetic ideals are too weak to deliver." He held up his hand, and the green lightning coiled around his gauntlet, dark and menacing. "I am not the hero this world wants. I am the consequence it needs. I am the surgeon who cuts out the cancer that you heroes are content to simply monitor." Tashinori looked at the boy, no, the man, before him, and saw the terrible, unshakable conviction in his posture. He had come here hoping to find a flicker of the old Izuku, a crack in the armor he could reach through. But the armor was sealed shut, forged in the fires of a pain so absolute it had burned away everything else. He was speaking a different language now, the language of the abyss. "And what happens when the cancer is gone, Izuku?" Tashinori asked, his voice a weary whisper. "What will you do then? When you have punished everyone you deem guilty, what will be left of you? You will be alone in a world you've terrorized, with nothing but blood on your hands." The masthead tilted. "Then I will be done. It's a better legacy than the one you're leaving. A legacy of broken promises and false hope." With that, Vidian turned his back on Tashinori. "Don't you walk away from me!" Tashinori cried, his desperation making his voice raw. "This isn't over. I will not give up on you, Izuku." Vidian paused, his back still to his former mentor. You already did, the synthetic voice said, the words quiet, final, and utterly devastating. You gave up on me the moment you chose me. You gave me a power I couldn't control and a burden I couldn't carry. You set me on this path. The only difference is, I am now walking it with my eyes wide open. He took a step towards the shadows of the seawall. I'm sorry, Toshinori choked out, tears finally streaming down his wrinkled cheeks, glittering in the faint starlight. Izuku, for everything. I am so sorry. Vidian stopped. He stood there for a long moment, a statue of black armor and green light. He didn't turn. He didn't speak. He simply lifted a hand, a gesture that was almost dismissive, almost sad. Then, he melted into the darkness and was gone. Toshinori Yagi was left alone on the beach where he had created a hero, now the site where he had failed to save a man. The cold night wind whipped around him, carrying the salt of the ocean and the bitter taste of his own failure. He sank to his knees in the sand, the strength leaving his frail body, and let out a raw, guttural sob that was swallowed by the uncaring sound of the waves. He had faced his son. He had looked into the abyss, and the abyss had stared back, wearing the face of his greatest success and his most profound failure.